Hola Dan, me da mucho gusto saludarte y hacer esta entrevista para los talleres que vas a hacer tanto en Granada como en Bari.
It's a pleasure to say hello to you, Dan, for the workshops that we will give in Granada and in Bali.
Thank you for inviting me.
Un gusto.
A pleasure.
Dan, algunas personas quieren saber cómo te iniciaste en el chamanismo, cómo llegaste a ese mundo.
Hmm. Well, when you look back, it looks very like a clear path, while in fact, I think it were more a door that opens and you choose to go through that door and then it leads to another door. But there were some moments for sure in my life that were clear steps in that direction. I am now in my early 60s and I started when I was about 18, 19. So I've been studying shamanism for more than 40 years. And at that time, there were hardly any teachers yet. There were some Native American teachers who were traveling through Europe sometimes, not many, but there were some. And I studied really shamanism through anthropological sources and the museums because I was studying textile. I come from a very long line of tailors and shoemakers on my father's side. And I was studying textile design. And I got so fascinated by the shaman costumes that I saw accidentally in some beautiful old photos. And I wanted to know more about the tradition that made these incredible, beautiful costumes. And I found out about shamanism that way, really through the objects and the costumes. And then I had been already meditating. I was interested in spirituality. And I realized that this is a spiritual tradition and it was very, very interesting for me. And I started making shaman costumes. I started making drums as I was reading about shamanism. And then I started to meet people. I met some Native American healers. I became a personal student of two Native American medicine men. I was welcomed to travel with them. They stayed at my home. I stayed at their place sometimes. I had a teacher from the Sami, from the nomadic people in Norway. They're also a shamanic people. And so I gradually met people who were practitioners from different traditions, and step by step it grew. But it really came through my love of the beauty of the shaman costumes and the symbols, the objects, the drums. They were completely magic to me. And at that time, there was no teaching available about shamanism in Siberia or Mongolia in Europe. That was very unknown. It was a scientific subject, but not something in let's say, the New Age. The spiritual movement wasn't yet focused on shamanism.
Wow, beautiful and long path.
It's by now it's more than 40 years. It sounds even strange when I say it myself because I really consider myself very much a student still. And because shamanism for me really is the art of creating relationships. It is knowing knowing you come out of something that is much larger than yourself, that you are not alone, that you are not isolated, that you are part of all living beings, and that this is not an abstraction, but that this is a living reality. So just like in a partner relationship or relationship with your brother or sister or good friend, over the years, the relationship deepens and you understand more about what a relationship actually is, the longer you are in it. And for me, it's the same with shamanism. The more I sing, the more I pray, the more I connect with not just the spirit world, but anyway, the world around me, the more my understanding deepens slowly, slowly, and the better my practice becomes.
Wow, thank you, Dan. ¿Y cómo entraste en contacto con las constelaciones?
How did you come into contact with the constellations?
Now, that's a good story. It was in the late 1990s. And I wanted a break from teaching shamanism because at that time I was realizing that some people used shamanism as an escape from, let's say, reality. And for me, it never was that. It was an enrichment of my life, but not an escape from life. But I realized that some people had so much difficulty. They could not have a job. They could not speak with their neighbors. They fight with their family, but they are friends with the eagle and Mother Earth. Well, it's fantastic they have a friend in the eagle and Mother Earth speaks to them, but we also need to have a normal connection with our neighbors, right? We live with people in the same building, and we don't have to be the best friends with our family. It's not always possible, but at least communicate with them. And I realized that quite some people in shamanism were doing shamanism, but they turned away from the normal world, and I didn't like that. So I felt I want to stop shamanism for a while. I take a sabbatical to contemplate about that. I don't like this fact that people do this. And then I got to know Bert Hellinger. I went to a seminar with Bert Hellinger, and I thought this is really fascinating because now it's suddenly about the relationship with family. It is about your practical daily life. And in shamanism, people don't do that. When I was on the reservation with my Native American teachers, people would never confront each other directly. Everything was very, very indirectly. And the constellations gave a beautiful and elegant way to communicate directly, establish new boundaries, make new connections. So I thought, this is great. And later I understood from Bert, when we got closer and started becoming more friends on a personal level, that he was exactly where I was in shamanism with the classic constellations. At that time, Bert Hellinger was at the peak of what we now call classic family constellation. And he was feeling the limitations of that because he was used to put up the client, mother, father, brother, maybe grandmother, maybe grandfather, sometimes an abstraction like the country or the war, but that was it in those years. And he started to realize that sometimes the root of a problem in a family is deeper. But the family constellation, as it was at that time, could not access these deeper roots of the problem. So he was a bit fed up. He felt limited by constellations, just like I felt something's missing in shamanism. So in a way, it was pure luck or pure blessing, because for me, constellations could fill the holes in shamanism. And for Bert, it was really the holes in family constellation. Shamanism had some answers to connect to the ancestors, to go deeper in the energy field. And I was one of the factors out of several. But when Bert started with the movements of the soul, that was partly based on the discussions I had with him about how constellations could change and open up. And I was certainly not the only one. He had many people who inspired him and who were inspired by him. But it was a perfect timing for us to meet. And so getting to know shamanism through my traditional teachers, getting to know classic family constellation in the late 1990s, I realized shamanism is not complete, family constellation is not complete. How can I weave them together so that the best of both of them becomes available for people? And that is actually what systemic ritual is. It is recognizably coming from a shamanic background. It is recognizably a systemic work, but it is not constellation. It's not shamanic practice. It is really the two, like two parents create a new baby. Wow. And in the child, you can see father and mother, but the child is its own being.
Mm-hmm. Wow, beautiful. Dan, entonces, ¿qué es un ritual sistémico? ¿Para qué sirve? ¿Cómo funciona? Ya que tiene esta conjunción, chamanismo y constelaciones.
And so what is exactly systematic ritual? What does it contain? What is this fusion between shamanism and constellations?
It's not systematic ritual, it's systemic ritual. It's a big, big important difference. So what is a systemic ritual? It's difficult to because there's many ways to look at it. What I usually do is I ask the people who come to a group to write me before they come to the group what they would like to work on. And so before a group starts, let's say we have 70 people in the group, usually about half the people writes me. So I have 30 to 35 letters with the requests that people have, their illnesses, their problems, their situations that need attention. I have a little questionnaire the organizers send to people before they can fill it in. And then with each of these letters, I do a little ritual at home. I close my eyes. I take a little rattle. So I sing a little bit, I pray, I ask, what can we do in the group that is supportive for this family, for the family members, the system mentioned in the letter, but also how can this letter be an inspiration and a help for as many people possible in the group. So we start with something very personal, a letter from one of the clients, but I usually look more for the archetypical elements in it instead of the details. I create a ritual which is already designed before we start working. So with a family constellation, you just put up some family members and see where it goes. In a systemic ritual, it doesn't work like that. You have a ground plan before you start the work. So there are certain positions people can take, certain possibilities, and then they can do, to a great extent, their own research. So the systemic ritual is actually, usually at least half of the group is involved in it. There might be a circle of family members. There might be a circle of ancestors. There might be a circle of resources around that. And we go to places where there is strength, where there is support. We take the time to receive this support, to process any tears or whatever needs to be processed. And then with this support, with this additional strength, we return to the family members. And then we see that the healing intelligence in every system, the healing intelligence in every human being starts working because there is less limitation and more strength and more healing already happened for everybody in the system individually. So systemic ritual has a combination of, let's say, this ground plan, which is structured. So there are limited options, you could say, from one level. But when we are using this limited structure to get more strength, more balance, more dignity, then there is the freedom to meet each other again in a different way. It sounds a bit abstract, and there are many, many different forms of systemic ritual, but this is one of the principles you will see in many of the rituals. Add strength, add resources to the system, take your time to integrate these, and then see how the system reorganizes itself with the help they have received.
Es súper importante lo que compartes ahora, Dan, porque tiene toda una estructura.
It's very important what you are sharing here because it has all a complete structure.
Algo que...
Well, I would say if you are on the sand, no, the sand is not a good, if you are somewhere and there is a piece of earth, right? And you have a bottle of water and you pour the bottle of water on the earth, it just makes a puddle. But if you first dig a little channel in a certain form and you pour the water will follow this channel. So what you do in a systemic ritual is you create an opportunity for the energy to move in a healing direction. In that sense, yes, it is not necessarily completely free, as in a completely open constellation. But a ritual, by definition, is never completely free. Otherwise, it would not be a ritual. A ritual has a beginning, a middle part, and end. It has a structure. It has a purpose. So there is indeed a structure, but within that structure, there is a lot of freedom in how you work within it. It's a bit of a paradox.
Sí, lo digo porque una de las preguntas de los participantes, los posibles participantes, es si podrían surgir fuertes emociones y qué les va a pasar.
She asked this because some of the participants are asking what happens if there are strong emotions that arise, what will happen?
Until now, they always find their place. It is as simple as that. There are different ways in which you deal with strong emotions. Anger and aggression, I don't tolerate so much, although tolerate is not the right word. You always have to look what serves the system, what serves the healing. A release of tears, a release of fear, a release of sadness, these are very essential. When there is a resistance to come closer to somebody, it's very important to feel that and to honor that. But we don't dump energy on each other. There are certain hygienic boundaries to that, but they are built in the system. So until now, it's very, very rarely that I have to intervene with any emotion, because the ritual creates pathways for them that they are naturally in the right place, in the right form.
Además, ¿cómo pueden los rituales sistémicos ayudar en una enfermedad, con un dolor físico?
How can these rituals help with a physical pain or an illness?
In a systemic ritual, we look at the system that the client is a part of. So if the root of an illness is systemic, you can have very good results. But the root of an illness is not always systemic. It can be because you had an accident when you were 3 years old, or because of something genetic. There can be just a biochemical reason for an illness that is not a systemic entanglement. So you have to be very careful. What we try to do in systemic ritual, we don't try to create wonders. What we do is we address the systemic roots of problems. And depending how strong these roots are, the work will be effective. So sometimes we work with an illness, for example. We can look at the body, we can look at the emotions, we can look at the mind, we can look at the soul. So the client themselves is also a system. And you can certainly look at the connections there between the different parts in the client, which sometimes help to find another way to deal with pain or with an illness. I have seen some illnesses being influenced very strongly by systemic ritual in a positive way. I've done the same work for another client and nothing seemed to change. But I think that's true for all these methods. They are systemic ritual is not magic. Systemic ritual is really a form of if the root of the problem is systemic, yes, then we can really pull out that root or replace it with something else, etc. But not all our problems are systemic. So that limitation of the method we have to accept. But any method is in that sense, and even food, right? If your body needs carbohydrates, you can eat so many proteins as you want, but it won't help your body, right? It's always like, is this the right method or not at this point?
Última pregunta, Dan. ¿Todos pueden participar?
So this is the last question. Can everyone participate?
I don't mean, can everyone participate? Well, I wouldn't recommend very young people. for example, no teenagers, because this really asks for a certain maturity. If you mean like regarding, depending your background, I do have a limitation in general. I tell people, but if people had like a psychotic episode, or they had like a really mental breakdown, or they have a heavy burnout, it's better that you don't come when you are in the middle of that to a ritual like that, because it might not be helpful. But if you are in a normal, I would say a normal kind of imbalance in your life, we all have problems and none of us has a perfect life. If you are in a reasonable condition and you have a certain amount of self-reflection, that's important, for sure, then you can join. And it doesn't matter, you don't need to be a psychotherapist, you can be an office worker, you can be an artist, you can be a mother who doesn't have a job, you can be a father who has a company, it doesn't really matter. You need a certain amount of self-reflection, but that's usually people interested in personal work, they do have that, that's why they do it. So in general, with normal limitations, like if you're ill, if you have serious problems, don't expect systemic ritual can suddenly turn your life magically into a Disney version of yourself. No, that's not going to happen. If you want to take another step in your process, if you want to make some realizations like, I see a little bit more and I have like a few new tools to take 1 or 2 steps forward, then it's very good.
Very clear.
Okay.
Muchas gracias, Dan. Nos vemos en Granada y nos vemos en Bari.
Very good. See you then.
Sí.